War movies are supposed to make your heart race. They promise courage under fire, impossible missions, soldiers who stand against history itself. But sometimes the biggest war films collapse in spectacular fashion. Enormous budgets, famous directors, massive battle scenes, and yet audiences walk away shaking their heads. Something went terribly wrong. Tonight we uncover 13 war movies that spent fortunes chasing greatness, but ended up becoming some of the most disliked blockbusters ever made. Flyboys 2006. War films often promise heroism in the sky and courage against impossible odds. Flyboys attempted exactly that by telling the story of the Lafayette Escadrille. These were American pilots who volunteered to fight for France during the First World War before the United States entered the conflict. On paper, the story was powerful. Young men leaving their comfortable lives to risk everything in fragile aircraft felt like the perfect recipe for a thrilling war epic. But when the film arrived, audiences reacted with disappointment rather than excitement. The production cost around $60 million, which was enormous for a World War I aviation film at the time. Yet viewers felt the movie leaned too heavily on cliches. Instead of exploring the psychological toll of early air combat, the film delivered predictable romance and conventional hero moments. The aerial combat looked impressive, but the emotional core felt hollow. As a result, the film struggled to recoup its budget and quietly faded from theaters. Battle of the Bulge, 1965. Few battles of the Second World War carried as much historical weight as the Battle of the Bulge. It was a desperate German offensive in the freezing winter of 1944 that pushed Allied forces to the brink. Hollywood saw this dramatic moment as the perfect subject for a massive spectacle and poured a huge amount of money into recreating the conflict. The result was a film that looked enormous on the surface but quickly angered historians and audiences alike. Instead of snowy forests and brutal winter conditions, the filmmakers shot much of the movie in sunny Spain. Tanks rolled across dusty plains that looked nothing like the frozen Ardennes battlefield. Viewers who knew the real history felt something was very wrong. And the scale was impressive and the explosions were loud, but the emotional authenticity never arrived. Characters felt thin and the story drifted away from the reality of the soldiers who actually fought there. Audiences expected a powerful recreation of one of the war's most dramatic turning points. Instead, they received a spectacle that looked impressive, yet strangely artificial. The lesson was becoming clear. Bigger budgets did not always mean deeper storytelling. Enemy at the Gates, 2001. The Battle of Stalingrad remains one of the most brutal confrontations in human history. Millions died in the frozen ruins of a city that became the symbol of resistance against Nazi Germany. The Enemy at the Gates attempted to capture this terrifying chapter through the story of Soviet sniper Vasily Zaitsev and his deadly duel with a German marksman. The premise sounded irresistible. Two soldiers locked in a psychological game of patience while an entire city burned around them. Early scenes hinted at the raw chaos of the Eastern Front. Crowded trains brought terrified recruits to the battlefield while artillery thunder shook the horizon. For a moment it seemed the film might deliver something unforgettable. Yet audiences soon noticed the story drifting toward melodrama. Instead of focusing on the devastating scale of the battle, the film centered on a romantic triangle that many viewers found distracting. Historical accuracy was also questioned by historians who pointed out several fictionalized elements. And the performances were strong and the setting looked grim and convincing. Still, the emotional focus felt misplaced. Viewers who expected a brutal portrait of Stalingrad instead found a war drama that struggled to balance spectacle with romance. The Monuments Men, 2014. War films usually promise chaos and sacrifice. Explosions shake the ground. Soldiers fight for survival. Yet the Monuments Men tried to tell a very different kind of war story. Instead of soldiers chasing victory, the film followed historians, artists, and curators who risked their lives to save stolen masterpieces from the destruction of the Second World War. It sounded like a fascinating mission. Priceless works of art hidden by the Nazis, a small team racing across a collapsing Europe to rescue them before they vanished forever. The production gathered an extraordinary cast. George Clooney, Matt Damon, Kate Blanchett, Bill Murray, and several other respected actors joined the project. The budget approached $70 million. Expectations were high. Audiences hoped for a dramatic and emotional story about preserving culture in the middle of global catastrophe. But when the film arrived, something felt strangely flat. The tone shifted constantly between light comedy and serious wartime drama. Moments that should have carried weight passed quickly without emotional impact. The story moved across Europe yet rarely created tension or urgency. Viewers struggled to connect with the mission because the stakes never felt fully alive. Critics described the film as charming yet oddly distant from the brutal reality of war. Despite its impressive cast and meaningful premise, audiences walked away underwhelmed. The story of saving art during wartime deserved intensity. Instead, the film drifted through its narrative like a quiet museum tour. Red Tails, 2012. For decades, the story of the Tuskegee Airmen remained one of the most inspiring chapters of the Second World War. These African-American pilots fought racism at home while proving their courage in the skies over Europe. Hollywood had long hesitated to tell their story on a large scale. When Red Tails finally entered production, the project carried enormous expectations. George Lucas helped finance the film after studios hesitated to invest in a war movie with a largely black cast. Nearly $90 million went into production. The filmmakers promised thrilling dogfights and a long-overdue tribute to the legendary pilots who escorted Allied bombers through hostile airspace. The aerial battles were energetic and visually striking. Planes twisted through clouds while tracer fire lit the sky. Yet many viewers felt the action looked more like a video game than a wartime reality. The computer-generated effects sometimes overwhelmed the emotional story. Another criticism centered on the characters themselves. The pilots were heroic, yet often felt simplified into familiar archetypes. Instead of exploring the deep racism and psychological pressure, these men faced the narrative focused mainly on explosive air combat. Audiences appreciated the intention behind the film but struggled to connect with the execution. The Tuskegee Airmen deserved a powerful cinematic tribute that explored their humanity and courage. Instead, the movie delivered spectacle that sometimes overshadowed the truth behind their achievements. The result was a film that carried noble intentions, yet left viewers wishing the story had been told with greater emotional depth. Green Zone, 2010. The Iraq War created deep political tension across the world. Hollywood rarely approached the conflict with the same clarity seen in earlier war films. Green Zone attempted to confront that uncertainty through the eyes of a soldier searching for the truth behind weapons of mass destruction. Matt Damon played Chief Warrant Officer Roy Miller. His mission seemed straightforward: locate hidden stockpiles of banned weapons before they could threaten the world. Yet as his team raided empty facilities, the evidence began to crumble. Intelligence reports contradicted reality. Rumors replaced facts. Slowly, Miller realized the war might have been built on misinformation. The premise promised a gripping political thriller set inside the chaos of Baghdad. The production carried a budget near $100 million and came from the same director who created the Bourne series. Fast pacing and gritty realism were expected. However, audiences reacted with mixed feelings. Some viewers appreciated the attempt to question the official narrative behind the invasion. Others felt the film leaned too heavily into political messaging. Instead of presenting a balanced war drama, the story sometimes felt like a lecture hidden inside an action movie. The tension between investigation and action created an uneven rhythm. Intense chase scenes appeared beside long discussions about intelligence failures. The result left many viewers uncertain about the film's identity. Green Zone tried to expose uncomfortable truths about modern warfare, yet the execution divided audiences and prevented the movie from reaching the emotional impact it clearly aimed to achieve. Alexander, 2004. Few figures in ancient history carry the mythic weight of Alexander the Great. He conquered vast territories before the age of 30 and reshaped the political map of the ancient world. Hollywood believed this story could become one of the most spectacular historical war epics ever made, where director Oliver Stone assembled a massive production with a budget that soared beyond $150 million. Vast armies were recreated, monumental battles were staged across deserts and mountains. The ambition behind the project was undeniable. Yet when Alexander reached theaters, audiences reacted with confusion rather than awe. The film moved through Alexander's life in a fragmented rhythm that felt difficult to follow. Flashbacks interrupted the narrative and characters drifted in and out without clear emotional grounding. Viewers struggled to understand the motivations driving the young conqueror. The battles themselves were impressive. The clash against the Persian army at Gaugamela looked enormous and chaotic. Thousands of soldiers thundered across the battlefield while cavalry charges shook the ground. But these moments of spectacle were surrounded by long conversations about politics, family, and philosophy that slowed the pace. Another factor that divided audiences was the portrayal of Alexander's personal relationships. The film explored his complex bond with his parents and his companions, yet many viewers felt the emotional focus scattered in too many directions at once. Despite its grand scale, the theatrical version failed to connect with mainstream audiences. Critics described the film as ambitious yet emotionally distant. Oliver Stone later released several longer director cuts that attempted to clarify the narrative. Over time, some viewers began to appreciate the deeper themes about power and ambition. But during its initial release, the reaction was harsh. A massive budget and legendary subject matter had not guaranteed a cinematic triumph. The 13th Warrior, 1999. Production disasters often begin quietly. A script rewrite here, a reshoot there. Yet sometimes the chaos grows until it becomes part of Hollywood legend. That was the fate of the 13th Warrior. The film was inspired by the novel Eaters of the Dead, which imagined an Arab traveler joining a band of Viking warriors in a brutal struggle against mysterious enemies. The premise blended historical adventure with dark mythology. Early expectations were enormous. The production budget climbed well above $100 million, which was extraordinary for a historical war film in the late 1990s. But behind the scenes, the project fell into turmoil. Director John McTiernan clashed with studio executives who believed the film was too slow and confusing. Massive reshoots were ordered, scenes were rewritten, and entire sequences were replaced. The final cost soared to around $160 million. When the film finally reached theaters, audiences sensed the uneven construction immediately. The story jumped abruptly between scenes as if pieces were missing. Characters appeared and vanished without explanation. Even the central threat facing the Viking warriors felt strangely unclear. Yet beneath the troubled editing, some viewers noticed glimpses of the film it might have been. Dark forests echoed with eerie sounds. Warriors gathered around fires preparing for battle against enemies they barely understood. The atmosphere hinted at a haunting historical epic. Unfortunately, the fractured narrative overshadowed those moments. The film struggled at the box office and became one of the most famous financial disasters of its era. The tragedy of the 13th Warrior lies in the ambition behind it. A bold story about courage and cultural encounters existed somewhere within the chaos. But studio interference and constant revisions transformed it into a cautionary tale about how easily a massive production can lose its direction. Kingdom of Heaven, 2005. The Crusades remain one of the most complex chapters in medieval history. Religion, politics, and power collided across the Middle East in a struggle that reshaped civilizations. Director Ridley Scott envisioned a sweeping war epic that would explore this turbulent era through the eyes of an unlikely hero. Our Kingdom of Heaven followed Balian, a humble blacksmith who finds himself drawn into the conflict between Christian crusaders and Muslim defenders of Jerusalem. The film promised massive battle scenes, towering castles, and a philosophical exploration of faith and duty. With a budget exceeding $130 million, the project aimed to become the next great historical spectacle. When the movie opened, audiences saw stunning visuals, Armies marched beneath burning desert suns. Siege towers crashed against ancient walls. The recreation of medieval warfare felt immense and visually breathtaking. Yet many viewers left theaters feeling strangely unsatisfied. The theatrical cut trimmed nearly 45 minutes of story to satisfy studio concerns about length. Important character motivations disappeared. Political alliances felt rushed. Emotional relationships never fully developed. Without those narrative foundations, the grand battles lost their deeper meaning. Critics argued that the film looked magnificent yet felt incomplete. Characters who should have carried enormous emotional weight seemed distant and unexplained. Years later, Ridley Scott released the director cut, which restored the missing material. Suddenly, the story gained clarity and emotional depth. Many viewers who revisited the longer version recognized the powerful epic hidden beneath the studio edits. But at the time of its release, the theatrical version failed to meet expectations. A vast production about faith, war, and humanity had been reduced by editing decisions that stripped away its heart. Burnt by the Sun. 2. Exodus, 2010. Few films carry enormous expectations long before the cameras even begin to roll. Burnt by the Sun. 2. Exodus was one of those projects. The original Burnt by the Sun had won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film and was widely praised for its emotional portrayal of life under Stalin. Director Nikita Mikhalkov decided to continue that story on a much larger scale. This time, the narrative would unfold during the chaos of the Second World War. The ambition behind the sequel was staggering. With a production cost of around $40 million, it became one of the most expensive films in Russian cinema history. Vast battlefield scenes were constructed. Explosions tore through forests. Columns of soldiers marched through landscapes that seemed to stretch forever. The goal was to create a war epic that would rival the scale of classic Soviet films. Yet when the movie premiered, audiences reacted with shock and confusion. The narrative wandered through long sequences that felt disconnected from one another. Characters appeared suddenly and vanished just as quickly. The emotional journey that had made the original film so powerful seemed buried beneath spectacle. Critics argued that the film had lost the intimate human drama that once defined the story. Instead, the sequel attempted to combine personal tragedy with enormous battlefield scenes. The result felt uneven and difficult to follow. Viewers struggled to understand the direction of the narrative. The box office response was devastating. Despite its massive budget, the film earned only a fraction of its cost and quickly gained a reputation as one of the biggest commercial failures in Russian film history. What had begun as an ambitious attempt to expand a beloved story became a lesson in how scale alone cannot replace emotional storytelling. Windtalkers, 2002. During the Second World War, the United States military used Navajo soldiers as code talkers whose language created an unbreakable communication system. Their contribution played a crucial role in several Pacific battles. For decades, this extraordinary story remained largely unknown to the public. When Hollywood finally decided to tell it, audiences expected a powerful tribute. Windtalkers arrived with impressive credentials. Director John Woo was famous for stylish action films, and the production carried a budget estimated near $115 million. The film promised intense battlefield sequences set on Pacific islands where American forces fought desperately against Japanese defenders. Yet almost immediately, audiences noticed something troubling. Instead of focusing primarily on the Navajo code talkers, the narrative centered heavily on a fictional American Marine played by Nicolas Cage. The men whose language made the mission possible often felt secondary within their own story. The battle scenes were loud and visually chaotic. Mortars exploded across jungle terrain. Soldiers charged through smoke while machine gun fire echoed in the distance. But the emotional focus seemed misplaced. The unique cultural importance of the Navajo code talkers rarely received the depth many viewers expected. Critics and audiences alike felt the film had missed an opportunity to tell one of the most remarkable wartime stories ever recorded. The courage of the Navajo soldiers deserved a narrative built around their experiences rather than around conventional Hollywood heroism. Despite its large budget, the film underperformed at the box office. Many viewers left theaters feeling that a powerful historical story had been overshadowed by spectacle and misplaced priorities. Pearl Harbor, 2001. The attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 remains one of the most dramatic turning points in American history. It brought the United States into the Second World War and reshaped the global conflict overnight. When Hollywood announced a massive film about the attack, expectations soared immediately. Director Michael Bay approached the story with the same explosive style that had defined his earlier action films. The production budget climbed to around $140 million. Giant sets recreated the naval base in Hawaii. Hundreds of aircraft filled the sky during the attack sequence. The scale was enormous and visually overwhelming. Yet audiences soon realized the film focused less on the historical tragedy and more on a romantic triangle between three fictional characters. Long scenes of melodrama interrupted the build-up to the attack. Many viewers felt the emotional tone clashed with the seriousness of the real event. When the bombing finally began, the spectacle was undeniably intense. Battleships erupted in flames. Sailors scrambled across burning decks while explosions tore through the harbor. Technically, the sequence was impressive and remains one of the most elaborate recreations of the attack ever filmed. But for many viewers, the earlier sections of the story had already undermined the emotional impact. Critics argued that the film treated a historical tragedy like a dramatic backdrop for romance. Others felt the length and pacing made the narrative feel exhausting rather than powerful. Despite earning significant box office revenue, the reaction from audiences and historians remained deeply divided. For many viewers, Pearl Harbor became a symbol of how spectacle can overwhelm historical sensitivity. And at the top of this list stands a film whose troubled production became one of the most famous disasters in Hollywood history. Gods and Generals, 2003. Some war films attempt to capture history with overwhelming scale. Gods and Generals tried to do exactly that. The film was designed as a sweeping Civil War epic that explored the early years of the conflict between the Union and the Confederacy. It served as a prequel to the successful film Gettysburg and promised an even deeper look into the personalities and battles that shaped the American Civil War. The production carried a massive budget estimated near $56 million, which was unusually high for a historical drama about the 19th century. Thousands of reenactors were recruited to recreate Civil War armies. Vast battlefields were reconstructed with careful attention to uniforms, weapons, and formations. The filmmakers clearly wanted authenticity and scale. Yet when the movie reached theaters, audiences reacted with frustration rather than admiration. One of the biggest criticisms was the film's extraordinary length. Running for more than 3 hours, the story moved slowly through speeches, religious reflections, and long dialogue sequences. Instead of building dramatic momentum, the narrative often felt heavy and repetitive. Another major issue was the tone of the storytelling. Many viewers believed the film focused too sympathetically on Confederate General Stonewall Jackson while failing to fully explore the broader political realities of the war. Critics argued that the portrayal simplified complex historical issues and removed important context about slavery and the causes of the conflict. Even the large battle scenes struggled to generate excitement because they were surrounded by long stretches of slow exposition. Audiences expecting a powerful Civil War epic instead found a film that felt unusually static for a war story. Despite its enormous ambition, Gods and Generals became a major box office disappointment. What was intended to be a grand historical epic ultimately became a reminder that scale and authenticity alone cannot guarantee audience engagement. War stories deserve honesty, intensity, and respect for the history they portray. When filmmakers chase spectacle instead of truth, audiences notice immediately. Some of these movies still contain fascinating moments, while others remain cautionary tales of Hollywood excess. Tell us which war film disappointed you the most and subscribe for more cinematic deep dives.